Okay, we're going to talk about getting music, getting sound. The name of the program is Sound, Shape, and Sense, the work of our words. But it's basically about getting music into your words. And that is for all kinds of writing. So I want to emphasize that because we have writers from FWA here. We have writers who are writing all kinds of things. So what I want to talk to you about today applies to all kinds of writing. And I have examples from nonfiction, as well as fiction, as well as children's books, as well as poetry. So whatever you're writing, hopefully I'll hit something in there that you are writing, but it is applicable to all kinds of writing, even in nonfiction. You'll see that here. So we're going to talk about getting this music into your words and how you do that. So let me share my screen, and hopefully this will work. I did a program on January 10th on voice for FWA, and had a little bit of trouble sharing my screen. So let's see what happens here. Okay. There it is. And if my picture is interrupting the slides over there, you have a little single bar at the top of your, where the pictures are. You can just put that down and then even move that whole thing around so it doesn't interfere.
Okay, good. I'm going to listen to this while I eat, if that's okay.
Can you see it?
Then I'll come play with Claire.
Okay. And yeah, and make sure you've got your yourself muted there if you don't. And now I want to pull my bar down if I can. Hang on. I'm not sure. Is my little bar interrupting anybody? Vic, you can tell me. Okay. All right. Sound, shape, and sense, the work of our words. All right. Okay. Well, I think sound is really important in our writing. And I love this quote by Stanislavski. He says, "We have as many planes of speech as does a painting planes of perspective, which create perspective in a phrase. The most important word stands out most vividly defined in the foreground of a sound plane. Less important words create a series of deeper planes." So you can see the little sound pattern there. So he's talking about having that perfect word choice out in front. But what's equally, if not, I think, even more important is that whole background color, that whole deep background that you create, that your foreground words stand out from. And how do you get that background color? Well, you get it from a lot of the things we learned when we were students in school. Things like rhyme, repetition, alliteration, assonance, consonants, onomatopoeia, meter. And by the way, I want to stop here for just a moment. I forgot to tell you that there is a handout. You don't need it right now, but all of these things are defined on the handout. There's a 5-page handout, and I'll give you the link to get that. It's on my website. But it has examples, it has the charts, it has even has writing prompts using some of the techniques. So don't worry about taking too many notes right now. Okay. So anyway, all of these things that we learned early on when we were studying writing are what helps to create that background color. Okay. So here's an example. This is a poem from a poem of mine called A Dreamer's Green, but I'm using it just so you can see how I've picked out the foreground words and done the background. Goes like this. Green, a word that sailors dream, the dim unwindings of flemished rope, a glint, a gleam, a grin, and then the rakish tilt of verdant brim, the sheen of velvet cape and glove, the hand unseen that belays the bark, green past islands of kelp hung dark, up slivered slope of rung and rope, a ladder's abeam, a listing moon, snagged in the arms of a drifting dream, and green, the moon's a waiting arc. Okay. Now you can see that these words, these unusual words, are the foreground words, the words that kind of stick in your mind after you've heard that poem. Flemished, verdant, bark, kelp hung, these old-fashioned words, abeam, words that begin with that prefix A, or also the prefix BE, makes it sound very old historical. So those are the foreground words. But what makes up that deep color in the background so that you ride along like you're on a wave are lines like up silvered slope of rung and rope. Not only do we have the alliteration of silvered and slope, and rung and rope, but you've got that internal rhyme, right? And we're going to talk about this more later. It is iambic, so it flows, it feels natural. Up silvered slope of rung and rope. And in many ways, I think that's almost more important than those foreground words. But we're going to talk about word choice right now. So here's a verb, meaning to get dressed, to dress. Words have several aspects to them, I believe. And one of them is they have a historical aspect. So here's some alternative words to dress: bedeck, clothe, or toss on. Now you can see bedeck is an old-fashioned word, might have been used in the 1800s or something. Clothe, maybe something your parents from the 40s or 50s might have said, go clothe yourself. And today, you're going to go toss on something. So words do have a historical aspect when you're looking at them for your writing. And in my poem, I wanted those old-fashioned words. Here's a little quote by Robert Burns: "And wild scattered cowslips bedeck the green dale." Okay, here's another perfectly good word. But here's some alternatives. And those words have an emotional aspect to them. Look at growl. Growl has that angry undertone. It isn't just shouting, he's growling. Has
phone number. Let me see if it's
sadness. Okay, somebody has their, doesn't,
so
make sure you're all good, please. Wail has
Yeah, I do.
deep, deep sadness underneath. Okay, gut sadness. And yawp is primal, by barbaric. And in fact, Walt Whitman uses it: "I sound my barbaric yawp over the rooftops of the world." Okay, just some wonderful alternative choices when you're looking at the emotional aspect of what you want to get through emotionally when you're creating a mood in your writing. Here's another perfectly good word, okay? Here are some alternatives: flabbergast, awe,
you are lost. Listen, leave a message.
Excuse me, Shutta. Everyone, please make sure your microphone is muted. Thank you.
Yeah, we just heard some talking in the background. Okay, so surprise is another perfectly good word, but it has some culture. These other words have some cultural aspect to them. Okay, flabbergast. That's a word my dad would say, a Kentucky farmer. I was flabbergasted that this happened. Somebody else who says to you, I was awed by it all. Well, awed is maybe somebody who has a little more education, a little more thoughtful about how they speak. Bedazzle, again, more old-fashioned, but somebody who has a lyrical bent. So I think that there is a cultural aspect as well to words. So we have a historical aspect to words, we have an emotional aspect, we have a cultural aspect, and of course there's a quote from Shakespeare at the bottom with the use of the word bedazzle. But we also have, and this may be a little surprising to some of you, here's a perfectly good verb, slide. Look at these alternatives: skim, glissade, and scud. Words also have a physical aspect to them. And that's something we don't often think about. But look at the word scud. Well, all three of those, skim, glissade, and scud, have an onomatopoeic aspect to them. They kind of sound like what they mean, right? But scud has got all those low set letters with just that one D at the end coming up, right? And glissade's got all of that high and low going across. We don't always look at words physically, especially if you're writing prose, if you're writing novels or nonfiction. But in kids' books, for example, here's an example from one of my books, Bravest of the Brave, in which they actually took the words and shaped them because we had young children reading it. Instead of using a written out number, they used the Roman numerals as well. So sometimes it's good to think about the physical aspects. And in fact, thinking of that, I heard an interesting story the other day. This is the famous architect, Frank Gehry. There was a documentary on him, and his birth name was Frank Owen Goldberg. And in the 50s, there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and he was starting out his career, and he was about Frank Gehry and how he chose his name because he liked the way it looked. And I thought that was interesting. Okay, so we're going to talk more. We talked about word choice, and now we're going to talk about some of those things that get that background color into your writing, those things we might have learned in school. So this may be a little review for some of you, but you'll see how writers today use these in all kinds of writing, fiction as well as nonfiction, as well as children's books, as well as poetry. Okay. I love this chart, and it's in your handout. Remember, I said there's like a 5-page handout, so you don't have to worry about taking notes or anything. This comes from a book called Western Wind by Frederick Nims, and he's looked at the frequency sound of vowel sounds. And this is important when we talk about assonance, which is a type of alliteration that you are repeating vowel sounds. But vowel sounds are important in the English language, and they help create a mood. So let's look at what I mean by that. Okay, here's a really famous poem that we all learned in school or read in school. Justly famous, called In Just by E.E. Cummings. In just spring, when the world is mud luscious, the little lame balloon man whistles far and wee, and Eddie and Bill come running from marbles and piracies, and it's spring, when the world is puddle wonderful. The weird old balloon man whistles far and wee, and Betty and Isabel come dancing from hopscotch and jump rope, and it's spring, and the goat-footed balloon man whistles far and wee. Okay, well, there have been many, many years of people trying to discuss exactly what this poem means, but one of the reasons it works so well is because almost all the vowel sounds are up there in the high range where spring is, and it's Eddie and Bill and Betty and Elizabeth, and it's spring. You have all those high, nice vowel sounds that make it feel like spring. But here's the interesting bit. The only low sound is that balloon man. And he's goat-footed. Who else is goat-footed? Often the devil's depicted as goat-footed. He's not necessarily a kind character. Is he the future for these kids, luring them on? Is he watching? So the only kind of dark, unsettling bit of that poem is down there in the low syllables. Let's look at some prose now. The same thing applies to prose. Here's the start of Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Fall of the House of Usher. During the whole of a dull, dark, and soundless day in the autumn of the year when the clouds hung oppressively low. Well, right away, you've got alliteration. And remember, alliteration is the repetition of beginning sounds, so we've got the D's for during, dull, dark, day. But you've got all those low vowel sounds, all that assonance, so the repetition of those low sounds. So everything feels heavy, oppressive as the main character is riding his horse toward the House of Usher. So you really, you couldn't do better than to read Poe to get mood, that's for sure. But here's a couple of others that you might not have thought of. The first quote is a quote from The Crossing by Cormac McCarthy. His first line reads, "On a winter's night in that first year, he woke to hear wolves in the low hills to the west." We've got all those W's, all those nice W repetitions. And of course, Hemingway does this all the time. Here's the old man of the sea. The old man hit him on the head for kindness and kicked him, his body still shuddering under the shade of the stern. So we have a lot of alliteration there. Here's a couple examples of alliteration and onomatopoeia from a couple of kids' books. The top one's from one of my books, and it reads, I'll just read the first bit. In the mountains down south, morning is musical. Moses, the rooster, wakes us with his cry from the top of Munson's Rock. My great-grandparents, Big Ma and Grandpap, clink about the kitchen whispering. The screen door swishes open and snaps closed, and I can hear the chickens in the yard greeting each other, cackling and scolding. So I have that alliteration with all the M sounds, morning, mountains, morning, musical. Now, I did not have to name the rooster Moses or the rock Munson's, but it seemed like the right thing to do there, to keep those M sounds going so that I had music, because I just mentioned that the mornings were musical. And we've got the door, and then I've got the onomatopoeia with the door swishing and snapping, and I've got the chickens cackling and scolding. So I was able to enforce that sense of music. Now, the second example is like my all-time favorite in the world. I love this. And some of you may only be familiar with Shrek from the Pixar movie or the books. No, read the original. The original is wonderful, and it's written for children, and he does not talk down to children. He uses words like varlet and scything through this book. It's just hilarious. And she is not beautiful during the day and only ugly at night. She's ugly all the time, and he adores her. Shrek is so in love. But here's the last two sentences, and I absolutely love this. So they got hitched as soon as possible, and they lived horribly ever after, scaring the socks off all who fell afoul of them. We've got those wonderful S's there, but look at those double F's and the double L's and all the L's and F's there. It's so, so beautiful. And they lived horribly ever after, scaring the socks off all who fell afoul of them. I think it's critically, and now we're talking prose here, but I think it's critically important to have that kind of music, that kind of memorable lines at the beginning of novels and short stories, at the end, and maybe in the middle where there is a high point of tension or toward the climax, something that will stick, that will linger with your reader. And William Steig really, hits the nail on the head there with the conclusion of Shrek. Here's a nonfiction using onomatopoeia from Lauren Isley, The Night Country. It is the games in which you were pummeled by other children's big brothers. It is the sharp, demanding voices of adults who snatch your books. Wonderful onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia, is using words that sound like what they mean, are words that sound like what they mean. And again, all of these are defined in your handout with examples. But pummeled, sharp, snatch. And again, Hemingway, of course, he does this too. The old man held him with his left hand and his shoulder, and now he stooped down and scooped up water in his right hand to get the crushed dolphin flesh off his face. He had those wonderful F sounds, dolphin flesh off his face. That's wonderful too, that alliteration. But you've also got scooped and crushed. So onomatopoeia and alliteration used in nonfiction and in fiction. Here's a wonderful example I like because it combines a bunch of techniques all in one little section here. This is called The Witch of Willoughby Wood by Rowena Bennett, a poem. There once was a witch of Willoughby Wood, and a weird wild witch was she, with hair that was snarled and hands that were gnarled and a kickety-rickety knee. She could jump, they say, to the moon and back, but this I never did see. Beautiful, huh? Well, it's got rhyme, yes, not end stop rhyme, as you may have learned when you were a child doing poetry. No, these are internal rhymes, she, me, see, and you've got the onomatopoeia, snarled, gnarled, and then you've got those wonderful, wonderful K, that consonants. Consonants is the repetition of consonant sounds. Kickety, rickety, knee, and back. It's and all those W's at the front for that alliteration. Once was a witch of Willoughby Wood, and a weird wild witch was she. It just flows like effortlessly. using all of those techniques that we learned early on in our youth in school, hopefully in your English classes. Titles too. Don't think it's just the text. Down there on the bottom left, it might be a little hard to see. That is the cover of The Haunting of Hill House. You got that nice alliteration. I want to talk a little bit more about Mark Forsyth's books over there, The Elements of Eloquence. What a great title, Elements of Eloquence. Great alliteration there. And I'll mention his book again in a minute. But I want to talk about the two top books there at the top, Teeny Tiny Toady and Digger Dozer Dumper. If you look at Teeny Tiny Toady, you'll notice that it goes down in the frequency scale of vowels. It feels right. It wouldn't feel right if we said Tiny Teeny Toady, right? It feels right. It feels perfect to say Teeny Tiny Toady because it goes down in that scale. Digger Dozer Dumper is an interesting example because actually the O, dozer, and the sound in dumper are not going down the scale or the frequency scale. But I want you to do something with me. We're all muted, so you can do this out loud. I want you to say it out loud. So I want you to feel it in your mouth. I want you to say Digger Dozer Dumper.
Digger.
Say it again. Say it again. Digger
Dozer
Dumper. You'll notice that digger is said up at the front of your mouth.
Digger.
Said in the middle of your mouth. You get that big round O, dozer.
Dozer.
And dumper said toward the back of your mouth.
Dumper.
Okay. Digger, dozer, dumper. Yeah, we had somebody else who wasn't muted, so do make sure you're muted. Okay. But it's, it feels right. Digger, dozer, dumper. It felt right. It feels right in your mouth to say it. I'm a strong believer that sometimes there are things we notice about a book or something we're reading, and it feels right. Can't really quite put your finger on it, but it feels right. Or it feels wrong, and you can't quite fit your finger on it. But as a writer, I really truly believe it's on us. It's part of our job to figure out why it feels right and why it feels wrong. So when I get something like this, or the next slide I'm going to show you. Oh, wait, not this slide. We'll get to it in a minute. When I get to something I actually absolutely love, I try to tear it apart a little. Not just think about what it's saying to me. Maybe it hits my heart and I love it, but I want to figure out why it sounds so right. And that's part of your job, I think, as a writer. Now, repetition is also part of what it's music in. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, let me go back, that book down there on the bottom right, The Elements of Eloquence by Mark Forsyth. It's a wonderful book. Now, it sounds boring because it's about rhetoric, but he's actually a very, very humorous writer. And the new edition has a slightly different cover. I'm going to read you a little section from it here in a second. And I'm not going to try to pronounce these Greek or these Latinized words here from types of rhetoric here. But that first one, anadiplosis, whatever, is the repetition of the last word from one clause to begin the next one. I am Sam, Sam I am. Now, sounds simple here, but these are used in famous speeches everywhere. John F. Kennedy's speeches, other talks. So, these are things that can get that repetition and get that music into your writing. The second one, a repetition of the same word with different meanings. So if you wish to wish a wish, from one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. Or the one I like too is, I think it's pronounced polyptonon, words from the same root word that are used more than one way in a sentence. So we give into our misgivings, or there are so many thinks that a thinker can think. And that was from The Things You Can Think. So anyway, I do recommend this book by Mark Forsyth called The Elements of Eloquence. Let me read you a little bit about one little section here and what he says about alliteration. This is under the chapter on alliteration. You can spend all day trying to think of some universal truth to set down on paper, and some poets try that. Shakespeare knew that it's much easier to string together some words beginning with the same letter. It doesn't matter what it's about. It can be the exact depth in the sea to which a chap's corpse has sunk, hardly a matter of universal interest. But if you say, full fathom 5 thy father lies, you will be considered the greatest poet who ever lived. Express precisely the same thought any other way. For example, your father's corpse is 9.144 meters below sea level, and you're just a Coast Guard with some bad news. So it's a very, very humorously written book on rhetorical techniques, and I just love it. So that's a plug there for Mark Forsyth's book, The Elements of Eloquence. Okay, now we're going to talk about something for a moment that most people hate, but we have to if we're talking about sound. We have to talk about meter. This is also from John Frederick Nims's book, The Western Wind, a little chart here of the different kinds of metrical feet. The 4 in the middle that are underlined are the 4 we use the most of the time. Okay, so iambs, trochees, I think I'm saying that right, anapests and dactyls. So those are really the only ones you need to think about most of the time. And really, if you work with meter after a while, it gets to be like dancing. It can flow. Remember the little bit I read to you from The Witch of Willoughby Wood and other things? Things can just flow so beautifully if you understand even a little bit about how meter works. So let's look at something. Now you're going to think, oh, first, hang on. We're going to do this one. This one is a bit of poetry from a children's book. And I want you just to listen to how it flows here. This is from the book called Bear Snores On. In a cave in the woods in its deep dark lair, through the long cold winter sleeps a great brown bear. Can you hear how that dances along? In a cave in the woods in its deep dark lair, through the long cold winter sleeps a great brown bear. And she keeps this up through the whole thing. There are choruses in between that are a different meter, but it's amazing. And what makes that dance along? It's the fact that she's using anapests, that soft, hard. We talk about meter. We talk about, in case some of you have never worked with meter, that in words there are soft sounding syllables and hard sounding syllables. Syllables you stress a little bit more. English is basically an iambic language, okay? Victor is an iambic word. Robert is an iambic name, okay? My name, Shutta, because I emphasize the first half of it, is trochee. But let's look at this. An anapest is a soft, 2 soft beats and a hard emphasized beat. She's got 5 anapests in those first 4 lines. In a cave in the woods in its deep. Okay, and then she's got 2 hard beats, dark lair and brown bear at the end. Now you might wonder about cold winter, right? Because there's an extra syllable there. But often what happens is if that very last syllable in the line is kind of partially swallowed by the reader, they don't count it. So what we've got is 5 anapests, and then the last 3 lines are all followed by 2 hard beats. Beautiful. In a cave in the woods in his deep dark lair, through the long cold winter sleeps a great brown bear. It's music, is what it is. Okay. Now, you might think that only applies to poetry, but not so. Again, when you're writing prose, you're writing novels, beginnings, endings, high points of tension are so important. Now, I was talking about sometimes we have to, you have to read like a writer. Now, there are times I don't read like a writer, I admit. When I'm just tired and I just want to get some piece of fluff and I'm laying out in my hammock, I don't read like a writer. But there are other times when I read something and I think, how did he do that? So here's the opening line again from the novel The Crossing by Cormac McCarthy. On a winter's night in that first year, he woke to hear wolves in the low hills to the west. Now we have the alliteration, we talked about that, all those repeats of W. But what else? That sentence flows. So as a writer, I stop and I look at it. And what has he got? He's got 5 anapests, and it's not even a complete sentence. In his first, 12, 15 words, he's got 5 anapaests that just makes it flow. On a winter's night, in that first, to hear wolves in the low to the west. It just makes for a very memorable beginning. So beginnings, endings, you novelists, take note. And in nonfiction too. All right. Remember I said sometimes there are things that just feel right, they fit, and you don't often know why. Well, there's 4 little sections here I want to read. The top 3 you will all know. The bottom one you might not. But I want you to listen to them. The first is from Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound.
Yeah.
That saved me.
No refund will be provided in case of booking.
Somebody's talking. Okay. I'll wait till they're done. Okay. So let's start again.
Yes.
Okay. Can you mute?
Because they encourage you to say.
Rich? Oh, well. I'll go on. Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Now, Emily Dickinson. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. And now, Catherine Lee Bates from America the Beautiful. Oh, beautiful, spacious skies for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. And now from Lisa Wheeler, a Michigan writer, this is her book, Sailor Moo. Red Angus gazed into her eyes, his heart began to warm. In Moo, he'd seen his dairy queen. Reform. Lisa has a lot of humor in all of her books and a lot of wordplay. But one of the things that reading her book, I thought, well, that just feels right. It feels right. Red Angus gazed into her eyes. His heart began to warm. In Moo, he'd seen his dairy queen, and now he must reform. Well, I realized the reason it feels right is because it is the same meter. It's called common, or it's used often in gospel songs. It's a common hymn meter, alternating lines of iambic soft. I don't know who Rich is. Vic, can you mute Rich?
Mute
sure.
everybody.
Yeah,
Mute
yeah.
everyone.
Yeah, I think you can mute him, Vic. Thank you. So the common meter is something that we have all lived with. I mean, that has been around for hundreds of years, and we know it by heart. So when something is written in that meter, it feels right. These are alternating iambs with 4 in one line, 3 in the next line, 4, 3. So you see an iamb is a soft heart. So you've got Red Angus gazed into her eyes. His heart began to warm, right? Okay. But look, it's exactly the same for America the Beautiful, right? America the Beautiful. God shed his grace on me. And it's the same for Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And that's also the same for quite a number of Emily Dickinson's poems. So when something is just, it's part of our history, you can use that. Okay, think about that. Now, of course, Lisa's book, it doesn't use the same meter all the way through. She uses that for her main sections, for her main bits. But, sometimes there'll be a beginning or there'll be an exclamation like, oh no, or something. So you can vary it a little. But if your main pattern sticks to the same meter, then your reader just feels like they're in that beautiful, colorful, deep background we talked about in a soundscape. All right, let me go on. Now we talked about sound. We want to talk about space a little. These are the elements that you see, the white space, a sentence, like things like that. But it also includes cesure and enjambment. And a cesure is just a pause or a stop. An enjambment is running things on. And you can use these. To great effect. We all know about concrete poetry. I happen to really love this top one on the left. It's from a book called Wet Cement, a mix of concrete poems. But look, the word pop-up, the O in pop has become a ball and has popped up and is flying through the air. And on the left page, you got ball, 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 ball. And under it, the line reads, I'm under it, I'm under it, I'm under it. And then the ball goes through, I blundered it. I love that. It's just great use of space. And of course, there are a lot of books nowadays written, novels in verse. And this Diamond Willow is a novel in verse by Helen Frost. And it takes place in Alaska. And there are many walking sticks made with, you cut the certain kind of wood and it makes these diamond patterns, as you can see there. So her entire book, the novel in verse, is written in these diamond patterns, different sizes of diamonds. And then within that, I don't know if you can see it as well as I can, but there are about 4 or 5 words that are highlighted and are brighter white. And those make a little mini poem. And this one says, Mom always knows what matters most. But so just a way of playing with space there. But you can use it in prose too. This is a book called Crisscross, which was a Newbery winner. And I can't remember what year. It's by Lynn Ray Perkins. She happens to also be an illustrator, so she was able to put these little wonderful illustrations sprinkled throughout her book. But she's used song lyrics to tell part of the story. This isn't just a song stuck in there that somebody was singing. It actually furthers the plot or character. In chapter 22, she has 2 columns going all the way through. And in that chapter, 2 different characters are telling about the same events from their perspective through the chapter. I love the one in the top right there, the haiku-looking poems. In this one, the kids are passing notes in class. It's not an English class. They're not supposed to be writing poetry, but they've written these senryus, which are, haikus about people, but they actually, furthering the plot again, or the character, are passing notes between each other in these haiku-like poems. So she's really played with space in her novel, and this is a novel. One of my books, we play with space, and then there's a deeper structure often within our books, especially in picture books, because in picture books, you've just got this one little gem and it's got to hold together. If it isn't faceted right, or if something's going to break off, it's not going to work, right? We're just going to know it's not going to work. So you often have these underlying structures and spaces that you're working with. So this is one of my books called A Family for Old Mill Farm. And in it, on the left-hand side, there are a human realtor is taking these humans around looking at different houses, and none of them are right. One's too windy, one's too dry and too sandy, one's too gray and not sunny, one's sunny, but there's no place to walk, blah, blah, blah. But in between the human realtor taking the humans around, there's an animal realtor who is a raccoon, and he's taking the animals around. And whatever the humans can't find, the animals do find at this old rundown place called Old Mill Farm. Now, this is somewhat, believe it or not, somewhat autobiographical, because my husband and I bought this old rundown farm where we lived for 27 years, but it had been a rental property, not taken care of for years, and it was completely, the grass and the weeds in the backyard around the pond were waist high because their mower had broken and they hadn't mowed for about 5 years. But so anyway, but it was the perfect place for us. So you can see this internal structure where from human to animal, and then the animals have a structure as well. The animals range from little to bigger. I didn't just want to put in, you might argue whether a cat is bigger or smaller than a rabbit. But anyway, I tried to basically go from smaller animal to larger animal and keep it in that order. Now, every book gets edited, right? And when I originally, I want to just show you that's tell you what happened. I originally sent in A Family for Old Mill Farm. I started out with animals first and then switched over to people. And you can see I have a kind of right and left the way I've submitted it. So there's a right story, there's a left story. They crisscross. Well, they said to me, but kids are reading, they're people. We should start out with people. I went, oh no, because of course my animal stanzas led directly into the people stanzas in the original one. But in order to reverse it, I had to rewrite every single line because the people verses had to lead into the animal verses. So the lines, even though the underlying structure was there, the lines, the set didn't make sense. They had to lead and one into the other. So essentially I had to rewrite the whole thing. Anyway, just so a little snippet from real life there. Sentence length, of course, is important. You want to keep your reader there. You don't want to have them running off because they're totally bored. This is a little snippet from Gary Provost. You may have seen this before. This sentence has 5 words. Here are 5 more words. 5-word sentences are fine, but several together become monotonous. Listen to what is happening. The writing is getting boring. The sound of it drones. It's like a stuck record. And then you go on, and he advocates mixing up line length so that you get a feel. Now listen, I vary the sentence length and I create music. Music, the writing sings. It has a pleasant rhythm, a lilt, a harmony. I use short sentences, and when I use sentences, and I use sentences of medium length. And sometimes when I'm certain the reader is rested, I will engage in with a sentence of considerable length, the sentence that burns with energy and builds with all the impetus of a crescendo, the roll of drums, the crash of cymbals, sounds that say, listen to this, it is important. Okay. So you can see, just think about that. We all have our own writing styles, but when you go back to revise. Now, say sure and then Jim, and I want to mention, and of course, In Just by E.E. Cummings, it's just easy to see this here. In Jammin, you see Eddie and Bill and Betty and Isabel, but in Jammin also is one line that runs into the next. So, and Eddie and Bill come running from marbles. That's also in Jammin. Okay, one line just leading into the next line where you want to finish that thought, so you go on to the next line quickly. Now, caesura are spaces, full stops, periods, dashes, commas can be used beautifully to get a pause. You want your reader to pause, and you see all the great spacing. E.E. Cummings was well known for this. But I want to look at another of his poems. This is one of my all-time favorite E.E. Cummings poems. You can see how it's laid out on the page, very interesting. Buffalo Bill's defunct, who used to ride a water-smooth silver stallion and break 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pigeons just like that. Jesus, he was a handsome man. And what I want to know is, how do you like your blue-eyed boy, Mr. Death? Oh, God. What a great poem. But look at his use of enjambment. Okay, and you obviously see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and pigeons just like that. But also Buffalo Bill's defunct, because of that apostrophe S, we want to go on and complete that thought, Buffalo Bill's defunct. And then you have the wonderful spacing, and you've got that Jesus would way over to the right, and then that big space, you've got to come all the way back to the left, you've got to pause. But what I also love about this poem is the way it's laid out on the page. It is just like a bullet shooting off. Right? I don't think this was done by accident. I don't think E.E. Cummings just kind of, well, he may have started out and then he saw what was happening and polished up. So it became this almost a concrete poem, right? Buffalo Bill's defunct, who used to ride a water-smooth silver stallion and break 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pigeons just like that. Jesus, he was a handsome man. And what I want to know is, how do you like your blue-eyed boy, Mr. Death? Just gorgeous. And great use of space. All right, we're going to talk a smidgen about sense because, other than your regular exposition that you're writing, your explanations, if you're writing nonfiction, we come to understand things by comparison. And so metaphor and simile are very important, as well as personification. I think personification is one of my favorite techniques. Metaphor, of course, is when something actually becomes something else, or you say it's like the legs of a table or the mouth of a river, where simile uses a word like as or like. It's a more obvious comparison, not quite as strong, but a more obvious to the reader in a lot of ways. And personification is giving, objects, things, ideas, thoughts, abstractions, human qualities. So let's look, again, this is nonfiction. So I think it's important for you nonfiction writers to realize that you can use a lot of these literary techniques. Here's a wonderful metaphor from Diane Ackerman from her book, A Natural History of the Senses. In this section, she's talking about smell. Okay. A sailor stands on the deck of a ship holding semaphore flags snug against his side. Suddenly he lifts them, swings both to the right in a take it away man gesture, then turns, squats, and sweeps the flags overhead. The sailor is a sense transmitter. She's comparing this semaphore flag waver to the way the senses, the sense transmitters in your nose works when you smell something. Wonderful use of metaphor. And I love this particular poem, A Dandelion for My Mother. You'll see this includes both metaphor and simile. How I love those spiky suns, rooted stubborn as childhood in the grass, tough as the farmers, big-headed children, the mats of yellow hair, the bowl-cut fringe, how sturdy they were, and how slowly they turned themselves into galaxies, domes of ghost stars, barely visible by day, pale cerebrums clinging to life on tough green stems, like you in the end. If you were here, I'd pluck this trembling globe to show how beautiful a thing can be a breath will tear away. I love this, partly maybe because my mother died of cancer, but I love the similes there, you know, rooted as stubborn as childhood, you know, tough as the farmer's big-headed children. And then they turned into galaxies, domes of ghost stars. It's just beautiful writing, using metaphor and simile. Here's two poems. I'll just read one. We're getting kind of long here on time. In which an abstraction is personified, taking on human form. So I read the one by Billy Collins because I like that. It's called The Lesson. In the morning, when I found history snoring heavily on the couch, I took down his overcoat from the rack and placed its weight on my shoulder blades. It would protect me on my cold walk into the village for milk and paper, and I figured he wouldn't mind, not after our long conversation the night before. How unexpected his blustering anger when I returned covered with icicles, the way he rummaged through the huge pockets, making sure no major battle or English queen had fallen out and become lost in the snow. Isn't that a wonderful personification of history? I just love it. And again, you can use this in fiction, in prose writing. One of my favorite books, The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak, takes place in World War II, and death is the narrator. So he's personified death through the whole thing here, but here's a couple of little sections just to give you a flavor for that. From the intro, the first part is, the question is, what color will everything be at that moment when I come for you? I do, however, try to enjoy every color I see, the whole spectrum. A billion or so flavors, none of them quite the same, and a sky to slowly suck on. It takes the edge off the stress. It helps me relax. And then later on from Death's Diary, we get, it was a year for the ages, like 79, like 1346, to name just a few. Forget the scythe. God damn it, I needed a broom or a mop, and I needed a vacation. And you really feel for Death in this book. Death has this horrible job that he's cleaning up, and so many deaths everywhere. He's really personified death just wonderfully through this whole entire novel. And then, of course, you've got the alliteration up there and a sky to slowly suck on. Just wonderful. Okay, let's move on. So that's the main part of the lessons there, but I wanted you to point out that there are many other things at my website, which is very easy. It's just shutta.com. Including handouts and irony and the final fill-up and hyperbole and understatement. There's also a picture book plot outlines, which a lot of teachers like to, and children's books writers like to download. And there's examples of books that use each of these kinds of, I was a librarian for 24 years, and I decided at one point just to take a bunch of picture books and kind of analyze how their plots are laid out, and to get like the 10 or 11 top most often seen plot outlines. Again, that's that thing about reading like a writer and trying to figure out why things work. I also have a brand new newsletter. It's called The Wordsmith's Playground. The first one came out last month. If you want to subscribe, just go to my website. You can click on Wordsmith's Playground sign up right there at the top, or you can jot this down if you want. Every month I send a link to one of the articles I've written. A lot of them are for the Florida Writers Association. And then I send a link to a free handout, and then I have a monthly writing prompt. So I would love to have you, I'm going to send my second one out soon, so I'm very excited about that. Here's the handout. It's a 5-page handout for this. So I've covered some of the charts there, the vowels, the frequency of vowel sounds, definitions, and some further reading and all that kind of good stuff. So that's just at shutta.com resources, or you can just go to shutta.com and click on the resources link at the top, okay? And Vic tells me that this will be up for a while afterward. We have taped it, hopefully that's come out, and you can access that later as well. And there's just a picture of some of my covers. My email address, if you want to email me a question, if you have a specific question. Also, FWA and others like to hear, and myself, if you enjoyed this program, send me a note on Facebook or something. So I'm going to